Hey, what's good everybody? Welcome back to another video. My name is Alchemy and this is part 3 of season 3 of Comprehensive Guide to Neuro Bass. That's a mouthful. So in part 1 of season 3, we talked about how to make kind of like our fundamental bass with just some simple movement. In part 2, we talked about probably the most important part, which is filtering. So if you haven't seen that, then go watch those. And today we're actually going to be building just kind of like a neuro bass from scratch, kind of from start to finish. Now, it's going to be kind of MPE minded, and this is all in regards to how I made the Eternum pack. If you don't know what that is, here's a quick example. And the kind of theme about how I'm building these patches as of late is to combine the elements of having the neuro type qualities also with the generative qualities all in a single patch with the power of faceplant, which is, I don't think that this would be possible to do in like a single instance otherwise. So with all that out of the way, let's go ahead and start to kind of look at the mechanics and look at some more in-depth effects that kind of fall outside of filtering and such to kind of build something that's, I guess, quote unquote neuro type quality. So what I'm going to do is I am going to make a quick setup before I go any further in this. I did pull up a patch. This was just for me testing the sound, but the first thing that I want to do is I want to look into multipass, and I'm going to pull up a preset that I have. There is a free preset that's available in the Discord that already has this, and it's just the fundamental thing that kind of is like basically the master default preset here has kind of allowed me to kind of skip a couple of steps on this. And what it basically does is I have a master mix now. So anything that I put into the multipass, I have this knob that's a macro over here, and this is dictated by the mix functions that you have over here. And one thing to note about multipass is that this isn't in serial. These are all running in parallel. So what that means is that if you take the mix out here, then all of these other things that are still applied are still kind of going out. And so it's important to know that kind of signal chain. I've also got this set up in Snap Heap as well. I'm not really sure what I'm going to be doing today because it's going to be from scratch, but keep that in mind. Now, the other thing is that I initially had the plan on part 1 to kind of build off of that first bass that we did, but unfortunately due to hard drive failure and, the debacle that I've had with my Apple M1 computer, I've kind of had to restart. But that's okay because you get to see the same practice again. Okay, so I am going to go a little bit fast through the initial building prospects of this, but keep this in mind with the master mix, and then you'll see me pull things up like that within Snap Heap as well. Actually, let's go ahead and do that because I'm sure that I will use that, and then we will get to building our actual preset. All right. Here we go. So let's go ahead and take care of some easy stuff. I'm going to set the master mix here, and then I'm also going to not touch this because I know that I'm going to do neuro stuff with this, and then if I pull up anything else, I might set it to that macro as well. I'm going to go ahead and start with a nice easy saw wave. And then let's give it some detuning. I'm going to turn the voices down to 2. And then let's give it some synthetic movement here. I like the synthetic thing. It just sounds like it's tearing, kind of like if you have 2 samples that are offset, like if you were playing it on the timeline. And it kind of just sounds like this. So you get a little bit more of that tearing aspect, and I really enjoy those types of sounds that are on that. The next thing that we're going to do is pull up some nice and easy distortion on the overdrive. Nice and chunky. And then I'm going to go ahead and grab a filter here and push this before the distortion. So on this end, I'm going to turn the slope up, and this is kind of like one of my key characteristics that I do because this is pretty much a low pass and a high pass with how wide these cut. So it's a great tool to use when you're trying to do some interesting filtering, but I covered that in part 2. It's really hard for me to like skip explaining things because I'm always assuming that the person that is watching this video has never seen the other videos, but yeah, all that stuff has already been described in my previous videos. So with these 2 modulators here, we will set the time to a synchronized BPM to some extent, and then we can already get some cool movement on that end. Now, one thing that I'm going to do over here just to help me out is I'm actually going to pull the smooth on this over to this side, so that way whenever this macro right here does that, it's actually going to turn it into kind of like steppers. Cool. Now, before I go any further, I think that this is just a really easy thing to do, but I'm going to set the note right here to be centered around F, maybe like so. Then I'm going to turn the range down to 24. And this is pretty much just key tracking the speed. And so what I'm going to do here is as this goes up, I'm going to pull the key tracking up a little bit on this instance like that. And so what this basically is going to do is whenever I move this macro, or sorry, whenever I play a higher pitch, in theory, this should move the movement between this filter a little bit faster. So if I pull this down, let's take a look. You can see that it's kind of slowing down a bit. And then I think I need to make that just a little bit more dramatic. So let's pull that up a little bit more. Cool. And you can kind of already tell now that it's not super dramatic, but this just adds a little bit of character to kind of simulate in some way or another the sampler-like qualities that you would get if you were to place a piece of audio in a sampler and then it plays back faster and yada yada, all that stuff. Cool. So from here on, I think that a lot of people talk to me and they're like, hey, whenever you do the randomizers and you start doing routing and stuff, like it's really easy to get lost, but you really want to focus on like, don't while making this patch, for one, don't try to recreate it. But two, the most important thing that you get out of this is just the idea of knowing what randomizers to set up and then just letting that go and make free flow creative choices. But also like having this mindfulness set up into this because it's going to help you make the randomizers a little bit more usable in that way. Does that make sense? Because the randomness is what we cannot control. It's going to do its own thing. However, if we're a little bit more mindful about how we control the speed of the randomness, and then we control kind of, I guess, like the shape of the randomness, then that does kind of like balance things out, at least like a little bit. I'm going to turn the jitter up on both of these. And then one other thing that you can be mindful of is instead of going over here to a new modulator, you can actually just hit Option click, and then that will create the same macroed, I guess, type of modulator just without any other controls. Does that make sense? It would be over here though. I forget that it always moves over to the right. So we will end up using this at some point, but for now, just so that way you can kind of sort of keep up, there's that. So this is pretty much all you really need as far as an oscillator goes, but I do want to kind of go a little bit deeper. So we'll go into a wavetable and I'll pull up a wavetable of my own. Doesn't really matter. I forgot I don't have my own wavetables anymore. So we'll go into something maybe simple, kind of like a growl. And what I'm looking for is something that still has a little bit of harmonics, but doesn't like lose its shape. So if you look at this stuff over here, you can see that this kind of is reminiscent of a square. This is kind of an I don't know territory. This gross one still kind of looks a little bit softer, kind of like a sine, at least to some extent. You kind of see it's almost square, but still kind of smooth in some cases. And then the further you go up, it becomes noise. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to focus on just playing around this part of a wavetable because it's not too many harmonics. And you really are trying to step away from the idea of like, if you're going to do FM, you don't want to have too much harmonic content within that because then it just becomes like, and there's a time and place for it. But with neurobase, usually you want to not do that. So let's go ahead and apply the phase to this, and you can start to see that the waveform is kind of multiplying in that way. But instead of just leaving it there, we're going to add some of the randomization patterns to that. And I guess we'll just take that one and then we'll go here. If you click on the yellow button, that means that you're going to modulate the modulator. What? You're going to modulate the modulator, which means that it's going to control whatever this is already moving. And so now, as opposed to it just being already FM'd 100% of the time, it's giving a little bit more movement to this that is kind of morphing the waveform in that sense. Now what we can do is we can multiply or duplicate this, and then we'll have this move across the wavetable. So just a little bit. And now whenever this goes, you'll see that this will start to move and change shape in certain ways. So let's take a listen to that. And so now, without having like any crazy like super effects or anything, we've already started to kind of create some interesting dynamics within that. That's probably not the right terminology, but by dynamics, I mean that it's varied. There's a lot of varied sound within that. Yeah, I don't know. I try to avoid using the same vocabulary. I like tonality a lot, or timbre. Anyways, let's go ahead and create a new group. And what this is going to be is just another, we're going to make this a square, and we're going to make this super detuned, kind of like this. And then we'll give that an output. Let's go ahead and turn this off so we can focus on this one. Right? Now, the first thing that we're going to do is we're actually going to high pass this because we don't want the low end kind of manipulating that in that way. And then we'll turn the curve up because I really don't want that sub there. But we still want some of that low end bite. And now what we can do is we can duplicate that filter, turn it into a bandpass over here, and we can focus on kind of doing some cool stuff where we will take a distortion like this, move that after the filter. I'm moving it after the filter because I want to cut before I boost. That's not really like gospel or anything, but it works a lot of times. But sending the distortion into this bandpass now is going to create something kind of like this. And so now if I add another sense of distortion after that, then what we can do is try and see what this will do now. And you can kind of hear that it's giving that like crazy sound. So if I pull back on this a little bit and focus on just this part of the sound, then when I go and apply another randomizer to it, what I might do is I might try to make it match the cutoff. Okay, there we go. So I'm going to make it match the cutoff in opposition to the notch. So that way, whatever is being notched, it's going to be replaced, in theory, by this little guy here. And that's just like, you know, I don't know. I'm doing this from scratch, but it's just ideas that I have to try to understand the relationship between whatever it is that I'm doing to the sound and then how I can kind of think about like jigsawing it and balance things out or whatever. And it still might not sound good, but that's just the idea anyways, or that's the theory. So now we've got a little bit of an FM saw, and then we've got a little bit of just like that basic square. And if this becomes too loud or whatever, we can always reduce the level in that way. But let's go ahead and take a listen to how that sounds now. Okay, that does sound pretty cool, but I need to control this just a little bit more. So we're going to back off of that, and that way it's not going to go so be so dramatic. And then I'm also going to turn this down to like 80% because it almost sounds like two different things pitting against each other. And what I'm looking for specifically is making it seem like it blends. Cool. Let's go ahead and collapse these. We're going to come back to them in just a second, but we can do just some basic things right here where we're going to think about pulling this up and we're going to boost the low end. We're actually going to keep the mids there, and then we're going to bring the high end there. And again, we're just doing ourselves some favors of having stuff to cut through, and in order for organization to be there, I'm going to just think about keeping this in one lane so you can see what is actually going on. So nice. It's already super chunky in that way. Okay, so anything that I do from here, this is kind of like the source sound, right? And I think it's fine as of now. Anything that I do from here is going to be all geared towards this first macro because this is going to be our neuro macro. And so what that means is that anything that is going to involve a mix of something, anything that is going to involve morphing the sound to something different than the source, that's going to be all going towards the macro. So multipass and snap heap are fantastic ways to kind of manipulate that in such a way. Just be mindful that that's kind of what I'm going for in order to kind of get this to start doing what I want it to do, to be more different, I guess. And you can still have effects on here that are a little bit different in that sense, but it's more so about just being mindful about how this is going to control and morph the sound into something that gives it more of those qualities, as opposed to if you turn everything off, it's still going to be doing things that you don't want it to. So there is a little bit of randomness to this, but it's not so dramatic that I have to turn other things off. Like you can kind of use this sound already just kind of as like a basic movement, kind of like what we were talking about in part one. Hopefully that is relative to you, or hopefully that makes sense. But yeah, let's go ahead and pull up our first multipass. I'm going to go ahead and duplicate this, and then we'll move this over here. So that way, if I ever need to like have more or do different things, I can kind of rely on that. Now, we talked a lot about filtering, and you're going to see a lot of that today. And I might even do some filtering outside of multipass. But for now, there's a couple of other things that I really like doing sometimes that really make this kind of stand out. So the first thing that I'm going to get into is kind of just laying out what I normally do for typical neuro processing. I make sure that the low end is in mono over here, and I usually set that to like somewhere on the low 110, 120 or so. I'm going to be using both of these in this way, and it's really important that we kind of make sure that that low end is in mono. And then from here, I might even do some stuff that I'm manipulating over here, and I'll talk about it in just a second, but this is kind of like the most important part that you want to focus on. Let's go ahead and turn that macro up for now as well. Over here, I almost always pretty much do the same kind of filter, which is a high pass over this way. And the reason why is because like, well, if you do any other kind of thing, unless if you're doing it on the super low over here, it's not really going to do anything, right? I guess you could do a super band pass like this and see how that sounds, right? Okay, that actually sounds kind of cool. Let's go ahead and roll with that and see if that becomes something interesting after. But I'm going to kind of just push this in this way. And then what I'm going to do most likely is I will duplicate this and make this a high pass and pull that back. So that way, let's go ahead and set that opposite. So that way this will kind of hopefully balance out to some extent. You won't be able to hear this if you don't have headphones. Now, one creative choice that we can make with this is actually using the nonlinear filter, but I kind of want to keep the low end relatively clean, sort of. So there will be a massive spike within that, so maybe I'll back off of that just a bit. Okay, now on this is kind of where the magic happens. The magic's in the middle, as some people say. And one thing that I like to do quite a bit is use delays on the mid-band that are really short to create some kind of metallic movement. So if we take a listen to this, you can kind of hear from that it kind of has that really cool, like, cybernetic feel to it to some extent. So let's go ahead and use that if we can. And I'm going to go ahead and pull this there. Sweet. Let's go ahead and grab a notch now with the nonlinear filter, and we can kind of focus on a notch here. Now, one thing that I still miss from the nonlinear filter is the slope, because I really feel like cutting this like super wide is pretty essential. However, this will do to some extent because it's not really just being used as filtering, it's also being used as a matter of distortion, right? So by adjusting the resonance here, you can see that you can get some pretty crazy stuff. I'm going to go for digital on this one because I remember this being pretty cool, but let's go ahead and push this up just a bit and let's see how that sounds. And you can hear this, but you want to kind of be mindful about where you're sweeping on this in particular, because if you keep going up further, you kind of get that screechiness or screechy sounds, right? So let's just maybe do something like that. And then we'll kind of just push this here, and then we'll grab that other other random mod, because they're kind of categorized under the same thing. And then now this is kind of moving on its own. Cool. Now let's go ahead and grab that normal filter, and then we're going to push that all the way up. And then we're going to pretty much do the same thing. I'm going to pull this in opposition, kind of like that, so that way it's not sweeping too far over. Because again, I don't really want it to focus on the areas up here, even though it's going that far. I'll adjust it in a second. But now that we have something like that, we can adjust the resonance and pull this more towards the low mid. And I don't care if it dips over here. The reason why it's going to matter up here is because I'm actually going to automate this with a macro, which I'll do later, maybe about that much. And then we'll also maybe macro the speed here and do that with this one as well. Let's just call that speed. And this one is band frequency. And I'm not really concerned. I know that there's probably a phase cancellation issue, but to be honest, like this is more just for creating like fill bases and like crazy movement, right? So I don't really worry about all that stuff right now. I'll worry about it when it gets to audio and it's already printed. But you can see here that it's starting to transform quite a bit from that. And that's a pretty cool thing. If you want this to be more dramatic, you can turn the feedback up, of course. Which might actually even be cool to try to mess with. So if we turn this up to halfway and then turn this down to the bottom, maybe a little bit more than halfway, then we can get some cool stuff as well. Something else that we can maybe mess with is the pitch shifter, and this is pretty fun. It's kind of like, it's a granular effect, grain size, but it essentially does like, well, pitch shifts it, but it does it by taking little bits, almost kind of like a short delay in some case or another. That's kind of what a delay does anyways, but it pitches it up to whatever is matching in that sense. And so by pulling this up or down, you can either create kind of like a pseudo chord out of your bass or out of your sound, or you can do like a bunch of different things. We're going to use this more when we get to the generative aspect of this, but let's just take a listen to what this sounds in case if you want to use it right now. I do think that sounds kind of cool, but the thing to keep in mind is that it's still in key. So if you're going to do something like this, it might be wise to do something that's like a fifth, plus 7, plus 9. Sorry, that's a third terminology. But for now, I'm just going to leave this at an octave. And if you really want to make this wonky and you want to break it, like one thing that you can do is pull this here, and then you can actually duplicate this and pull this to -12, and then flip this here and pull that up a little bit, and then let's just see what that sounds like. Yeah, it's a little bit overboard, but sometimes you can get away with it. Now that we have something like that, let's go ahead and talk about some other things that we can do. For one, we can add a chorus to this, which sometimes can sound pretty nice. I'm going to pull the delay down a little bit and just pick something here to modulate. And that's pretty much what I do, is like if I wanted to move, I have a easier choice between these two, and I'm just like, okay, modulate. And that makes things a little bit easier for me. Something else that's important is that if you do something like this is a cool little trick. Sorry, I just thought of it. But what you can do is, let's say you're taking away a lot of frequencies with something like a bandpass. Right? Which can sometimes be useful. What you can do is, for one, you can actually set this to keep the bandpass on, but you can actually pull the mix down from this to make sure that even if this is at full percent, this will take over and pull this mix down to kind of make everything a little bit cleaner at times. Regardless of if it has a bandpass or not. So now that we know that, we can kind of combine the two between that and kind of do something in the low mid region. Maybe give it a little bit here. And then I'm also going to pull this over towards before this kind of distortion type thing. Cool. All right, let's keep going. Yeah, like I said, the magic is in the middle to some extent. Let's go ahead and bring some of that stuff back with just a touch of distortion. We don't really need that much, but maybe a little bit. There we go. And now on the high end, it's kind of up to you. I usually don't do much, but just for the sake of funsies, let's try a flanger or so. You can get away with a lot more distortion on the high end. And in some cases, it's a wise idea, because usually the first thing to go whenever you do filtering is more of the high end. But if you kind of just blow it out of proportion, or like you put too much stereo on it, then it can actually like falter the entire sound. So I'm going to see what we can get away with maybe just a little bit of this and see what that does. Okay, so I can't hear it that well because all the other stuff is going on, but let's go ahead and solo this. And I really want to try to emphasize the tearing aspect of this. Cool. And now we can kind of manipulate the stereo mix, or not the stereo mix, but the mix in general just a little bit with one of these. Doesn't really matter. And it's just, again, for the sake of movement. Cool. So why does this matter now? Well, because we are kind of doing a couple of checks here. The first thing that we're doing is, remember when I was telling you just about the bandpass filter that we have here, right? Okay, well, if this band is all the way up here, then this is going to cut everything that's not this. So what you can do to kind of make this a little bit more usable, hence the beautiful thing about macros on this in particular, is that you can automate the band frequency on one of these just a little bit. And you can pull that up to some extent. Now what I did was that if you look here, this means that it's only going to go up to wherever this is, and that means that it's only going to go up from here. So normally this would typically be at like 3K, but from pulling this down a little bit and pulling that up, that means that it's going to allow the bandpass to control a little bit more of the mid and high mids in between that. Now what we can also do is we can grab the note here and map that to the speed. And so whenever we play that with a higher pitch, you'll see that the speed will kind of go up as its own macro, right? Pretty sick. Okay, so now that we have that, let's go ahead and pull the master mix down and let's listen to that. And as you can hear, we pretty much have the source or the base sound, basic sound, fundamental sound of that. And so if we kind of like retrace some of our steps and backtrack a little bit, if you look right here with macro 1, that would be where we would activate our MPE to this. So I don't have an MPE device connected, but taking a look at the modulators here, the pressure is mapped to the macro. So the harder that I would normally press a key, the more that it would activate the neuro aspect of this. So taking a look, right? That's kind of the first part to that. But there's more that I want to do to this. So that's kind of just a simple like way that you can put something together. And again, like from all these racks that I have from something like Eternum, you can see that all the things that I've created here are pretty much in that design. But the most important thing that if you're trying to create a patch like this is regardless of what you do with processing, and it doesn't even have to be neuro, like this could be for like making like cool evolving bells or pads or whatever, but having the master mix on this is such an important key towards making this work to have something that's really cool for a source sound or whatever, and then activating the extra stuff, right? So let's go ahead and talk about some more things that we can do because this is not done. As lengthy of a video as this has become, it's a comprehensive guide. So what can you say? So what I'm going to do now is I am going to do a little bit more interesting movement with the slice EQ, and I'm going to bring back some of the stuff that we would normally be losing. What I am going to place here is a notch and a boost, and then I'm actually thinking about placing another small boost that's geared towards the low mids, kind of like right here. And let's go ahead and open the filters over this way, and now I think I'll add just another randomizer over here, and I'll focus on the cutoff on this one is going to match in opposition the notching with this one, and then over here I'll grab a different modulator, doesn't really matter what it is, and I'll pull the cutoff down to here. And let's just adjust that a little bit. So now we've got some kind of moving stuff that you can see is doing interesting things. Now, like we had talked about before, what I'm going to do is I'm going to move the mix over this way and turn that up, and then turn this down all the way. So that way, again, this is only moving whenever the neuro stuff is activated. Cool. You get the idea, right? Hopefully. So the final things that I usually like to do, and we can go more into this, like we can do comb filtering within the multipass. We can also set up like external effects that are outside of this if we wanted to. So let's say we wanted to make it a little bit more not metallic. We can go ahead and just kind of pick and choose from whatever we want. Maybe we want to do something like this. And then again, we'll set the mix over here to kind of be on that sense. So take a listen to this now. You can hear that the comb filter is pretty dramatic, so it might be wise to kind of pull back on that. Or what you can do is kind of dial back on this just a little bit and find the root of the note, or the root note, which is F is like usually 345-ish. I'm sure someone in the comments is going to be like, it's this specific frequency number. Don't be that guy. It's somewhere around this region. So now that it's here, we're kind of playing around this frequency range in order for it to bite through like the upper mid harmonics of that. Which actually sounds kind of cool. Maybe we don't want this to be a full mix. Well, it doesn't have to be all the way. So you can just introduce just a little bit of it to give it some of that quality. But you can start to see already that by making these small, subtle changes to this stuff, it's really making a dramatic feel. So just for the sake of funsies, I'm going to keep this at a pretty low mix there, and then we'll kind of adjust more later as we go on. So there's two final things that I do on here, and I'm not going to go through like every single effect down here and talk about how it could work. It's more of like, if you don't know what these effects are, then that's the most important thing, is like learn those effects, because that's what's going to help you figure out how to make this stuff work, right? of like, hey, I'm in multipass. Well, what do I do? Why did you make these choices, right? It's because I'm trying to be aware of what it's doing to what it's doing to the sound. And so if you don't know that stuff, then as opposed to just following what I've just done, this is really important, guys, or what you should do rather, is put every single effect on that frequency band and then put a randomizer on it and see how it changes the sound over time. Because I haven't explored all the options. There's an infinite matter of combinations that you can do with this. And so that's why it's really important for you to just try stuff out, because otherwise you're never going to know for yourself. You're just going to be kind of following your YouTube tutorials. That is fine up until a point, but if you really want to understand this stuff, you have to do the exploration on your own. So since we have this back open, one more thing that I might want to add to this, just for the sake of being like, all right, well, here's some other stuff you can do, is just a little bit of frequency shifting. Now this is going to be really cool because like, on one end, it was really salty that frequency shifter didn't have a mix on it, and then I understood that it was probably meant for the sake of multipass, but it's only going to activate whenever this mix is pulling up anyways, so you'll get kind of like this warping effect whenever you use it to a low rate. If it's really fast, you're not even going to be able to hear it, but this is kind of what it sounds like. Let's make it dramatic. All right. You're probably not even going to be able to tell, to be honest, but throw a frequency shifter on the outside of any DAW that you have, and then you'll be able to see what it does. So let's go ahead and give it some compression after that to try to control the dynamics. And one thing that you want to be mindful of is like, and I'm not the best at this, but I do try to keep it in mind, is that there's going to be changes in amplitude whenever you throw this stuff in here. So if we turn all this stuff off and listen to what it sounds like, right, and then we turn this on, you can see that the change in that is a lot more dramatic. And so some stuff that we'll do at the end of this, I keep saying like one more thing. I'm sorry, it's because I get excited over this, or one thing that we can do is add a little bit more like crunchiness to the high end. So we can go into user and we'll go into ocarina to time. Get it? All right, bad joke. Go take the overachiever preset, turn off the bottom, turn off the top, set the mix to 50%, and you've got essentially what would be an OTT. And then we're going to grab this one here at the bottom and just make sure that our low end is in mono. It's really important. So stereo, mono, the mix needs to be all the way up for that one. That's pretty much what you can do with that one in that sense. Then we can go ahead and add a dynamics over this way and crunch the heck out of it, kind of like so. And then we can kind of bring everything back up to make it really loud with the limiter. Now, for me personally, because of my headphone situation, I actually make everything way louder than it needs to be in an actual mix, but it's fine. Just turn it down if it's too loud in your tune, right? It's not supposed to be like ready. It's supposed to be like, here's something inspiring and now make changes to it. That's why everything is randomized in the first place, just to be mindful of. So yeah, I guess since we're on the subject here, what we can quickly do is we can maybe even look at bringing up a sense of snap heat. So if we go like this and we want to do some processing like that, like maybe you don't want to do some frequency splitting or whatever, you want to do something that's more in the sense of band splitting. So what I mean by that is instead of this being frequency dependent, it's just 1 band, 2 band, 3 band. And this is just kind of some stuff that you can do to kind of set up some interesting filter situations to create more dynamic stuff. What I'm going to do here though is I'm going to create a relationship between these two. Because this is going to have super dramatic processing in between, on this one, I'm actually going to set the mix to be all the way up. And on this one, I'm going to set the mix to be all the way down. And then I'm going to interpolate between these with a randomizer here. Okay, so you're not going to be able to tell because the master mix is already on that, but rest assured they'll be doing different things. But now that this is in parallel, then I pretty much have full control to kind of mess with this in any way that I want. So maybe what we can do is focus on, like, I'm going to try to make this a little bit more simple just for the sake of time. I'm just kind of, again, showing you possibilities. But let's go ahead and take that short delay, kind of like this. And then we're going to move that down. And then what we'll do is send this through a bunch of different things here. So that'll be there. We're going to go to this LFO and kind of morph that between something like this. So something kind of like so, that's way too far. I want that to be more so focused over in this position. And then we can kind of set something else up like a pitch shifter, maybe like here, keep the mix kind of consistent now so that they're not going to be moving together. Turn the correlate on. Let's go ahead and just focus on this one for now. Cool, and we can create another delay now. Nice, that's what I was looking for. We'll go ahead and place that there so that way it morphs in between. And then we will probably end up just doing that with the filtering at the bottom. Cool, so with this one, let's go ahead and kind of do the same thing. We're just going to use a notch filter, and then we're just going to cut everything through this with this one, kind of like so. And we'll take this one. That's still on LFO, so I need to change that, but we'll mess with it here in just a second. But there's that. Change that to random. Let's go ahead and push that through a distortion. And then we'll also play with maybe a phaser on here. That sounds pretty cool. So now these are in parallel. So you can kind of set it up however you want. But one last thing that we also want to do is we want to go to the macro 3, which will also be dictating the speed. We're going to pull that up to like halfway, go to this one, also pull that up to halfway, and then label that as speed. Sorry. PEED. And now between this, we can go to the outside of that and do the same thing with the note. So we'll go here, and that will dictate the speed. Yay. All right. As you can see, like the depth of complexity that you can get into one of these patches is pretty extensive to say the least. Working between all these things, right? I think the last thing that we'll get into is maybe just some compression, and that will allow us to kind of like try to control everything in between these two to some extent. But as you can see, let's go ahead and turn that down. Once we turn this up, it's going to, sorry, we also didn't map that yet. So now we'll map this. But now as we turn everything up, everything activates, everything doesn't activate. All right. So let's go ahead and finish this puppy up. Let's go ahead and add one more multipass. I lied. One more snap heap because we don't need a frequency split, but we're going to add one more instance of snap heap on this. And no, I lied. We're just going to use this one because that's going to be easier. On this band, what we will do is we're going to keep everything at 100%, but we're going to add in a low pass filter. And then after that, we're going to add in a reverb. Okay, so the reason why I do this is one of my favorites. And the reason like I think that it just sounds super cool is because it's kind of like the finishing touch to making everything sound like it has like, how do you say, the ultimate like morphing sense. And I just get a kick out of making this sound spacey to some extent. So the easiest way to do this would be to automate the reverb with these two, but it's going to change with the speed. But actually, I kind of wanted to show you like that you can do that, but actually what I really want to do is instead, I'm going to set these to their own macros, actually to their own macro in general. So these two are going to be dictated by this macro and this macro here. But what I'm going to do is move the cutoff all the way over here and turn this up all the way. So that way it's always going to at least have a little bit of sub, but it's kind of be able to do its own thing. I lied. I want these to be independent as well. So we'll set this macro over here to kind of be its own thing as well. So we'll call this low pass or just low, and then we'll call this re for reverb. And then I want these two to be controlled separately from this. And again, guys, I'm doing this from scratch, so bear with me, okay? Let's go ahead and move these separate, and then I'll grab another randomizer here, and we can pull this up to this. Let's go ahead and look at what this does if this is at 100% on our CPU. I'm on a good PC, so your PC might be melting right now, but whatever. Oh, we're okay. Right. So the reason why I wanted these to be a different placement is because I actually want these to be faster than the other stuff, because I want this to really take in the low aspect of that. Cool. Now, this is really cool, and I'm going to keep that, but I'm going to show you a different way that you can do this too, just because it's more information, and you're probably melting your brain right now. Sorry. You said you wanted in-depth stuff, and so we're going to do that. All right, so this is going to be turned on, and we're going to pull this down to here. And so what that is going to allow us to do is that whenever this comes on, it's actually going to activate the low-pass filter. But we can take the same one right here and mess with the cutoff and turn this up, something kind of like that. Oh, sorry. What I meant to say was what we'll do instead is we'll take this and then place it on the gold. So that way, whenever this is activated, it'll start to turn on. Cool. Now we can make that more dramatic. There we go. But when this is at here, this shouldn't really mess with it. So it's a little bit more complex modulation in that sense, but I do find that it's worth it because it will give you more varied sounds. Then we'll do the same thing with the reverb to that sense as well. So we'll grab one here and then we'll pull this down. I'm not really concerned about how the reverb is going to stack. I imagine it's actually going to make it sound cooler anyways. So we'll just pull that up there, and then we will dictate the macro here to the depth of that, of how much it's actually going to control. So when this is all the way down, it's not doing anything. When it's time to go, it's going to wake up and it's going to do its own thing. So you can see that like when this is turned on, like this means that all the processing is going to go through this. And this is just like one possibility that you can go through that. And again, guys, if this doesn't sell you on why Faceplant is the best synth on the planet, well, I don't know what to tell you. So yeah, let's take a listen to our final sound and then we'll end the video and we'll talk about part 4 when the time comes. Once again, my name is Alckemy. Thank you so much for watching this video. Let me know if you guys have any questions in the comment section. If you guys want to support the channel, consider becoming a member or go buy my newest pack, which is called Eternum, that already has stuff pre-made like this. Part 4, we're going to be talking about the generator aspect of this. Then in part 5, I kind of want to talk about maybe how to further process it. And then maybe I'll do a part 6, which will talk about how to actually apply it in a song. I don't know. Let me know if you guys want that kind of content. Thanks again, guys. I'll see you in the next one.